glass window, and in the middle of the stained glass window is the dove of the Holy Spirit, and there's just like light rays kind of coming out in every direction. And I stood and gazed at that for quite some time, and the sensation, the insight that was coming through was a very, very distinct sense that the depth of Christianity itself is almost unknowable. Like the depth of seeing that is cultivated through the course of walking that path goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And with that deeper cultivation of beauty, amongst other things, a capacity to see more. So there's kind of a cultivation of the vision of being the vessel that can kind of see into and through these things. And I think from that place, the artwork, the iconography, the ritual, the Eucharist, and things like that start to really just become sort of cosmic poetry. We are live. This is Sense Space and Christianity Going Beyond Itself, as a series continues today with none other than Daniel Garner. OG Rose, my friend, he is on the farm. He's actually not on the farm. He's inside of a watercolor painting right now. He's trapped. It's great to have you back, Daniel, on a wide terrain of dialogical explorations continues today.
Indeed. It's always a pleasure, Jacob Kashir, and it is a delight to have a chance to speak with you. I greatly enjoyed the conversation we had down right there at the barn. That was a treat, and it is always a pleasure to spend time with you. So thank you, Jacob, for the opportunity.
Likewise. I actually have uploaded that, so that's dropping momentarily. You'll be receiving that very soon.
Outstanding.
And the audience will also be able to dive in on liminal education, the liminal future of education, or the future of liminal education. I couldn't really decide which, but it's both and. Okay, so yeah, picking up. Yesterday, I was walking around Oaxaca, and as one does on a Sunday, try not to work, try and rest, and go and see friends and explore and so forth. And I ended up passing a big cathedral, as you do, and I went inside, and boy, it was full. It was really full. It was like St. Paul's Cathedral during a wedding of the Queen or something. Like all of the side aisles, all of the main body of the church, and then like maybe something close to a dozen like kind of side chapels, all of which had been open and were also filled with people. So I'm just like walking through this thing. It feels like some sort of ceremony scene in Star Wars or something, like just walking very slowly into the church space, and everybody is chanting, in relative unison. So that was quite potent. And then I found a beautiful, beautiful chapel in the back that was just like completely dark with only illumination at the front of the kind of altar in the chapel with the Virgin, with the Maria statue. And it was a very, very potent prayer sort of experience for me. And what came through in that experience, and something that I've been reflecting on a lot, is the idea of beauty as a judge. It's something I've heard from, I think, maybe Dr. Peterson. I don't remember exactly where I first learned of this idea, but it's one of those things where you receive the idea first, and then like slowly it starts to really open, and you realize how can I put it? I have a sense that there's some ideals nested within my soul that when I come into contact with them. In this case, like the ideal of the woman who is really like given to the sacred and like in relationship to that. Something I'll experience also sometimes when I see like just a very radiant pregnant woman, like there's a sense of like this is the most radiant thing, and it's almost a judge of me. It's like everything that I'm doing in terms of being a unwedded, unchild given bachelor is kind of like rendered under this very powerful ideal. And it's almost a feeling that that ideal is bigger than me, or it's deeper than me, or it's deep coded within me, and it's not clear to me whether that's from Christianity, from the Christian substrate, whether it's even deeper than Christianity. But in any case, there's something about coming into like a deep heart connection with those ideals, that really transforms everything for me. And it's very, very clarifying to have those experiences. So I'm kind of coming fresh off the back of that. I think there's a very broad terrain, obviously, in Christianity beyond itself. It may also be useful for us to introduce a little bit again what's indicated by that, what's meant by that. But maybe this time we can just kick off with the judge of these magnanimous ideals that we encounter.
Well, I think that's perfect, because beauty is supposed to be the reason why you go beyond yourself. Like, what else would make you go beyond yourself that wasn't dogmatic, moralistic, or forceful other than beauty? And the key to beauty is, in fact, that there is a kind of judgment in it that is not moralizing, but more like the famous Wilco poem, "You Must Change Your Life." When you see something beautiful, you feel a judgment before it that also inspires you to do better, or to rise to its occasion, or do better in terms of your capacity to handle mystery. Like, it's not, the other issue is it's not a better that's a kind of moralistic better. It's almost like, well, of course you're not going to be stealing, or it's like obviously the moral good you're doing, like that's not even something we really need to talk about unless you're very young, right? When you're at mid-year, especially. That's why Dante's Divine Comedy starts at midlife, 40s. In midlife's journey, I was in a dark wood. That's kind of, you could say, almost traditionally where beauty is supposed to kick off. That's supposed to be, all right, you've gone through the ethical training. All right, you've gone through the educational training. You figured out how to tell the difference between good and bad, to judge that. But what about the judgment of beauty? There's some kind of maturity of that kind of judgment. When I think about going beyond oneself, it's talking about something like that. It's talking about, like, because if you say, man, we're bored and ought to go beyond ourselves, that could be a motivation of a certain privation, a motivation of a certain lack, really, negative lack, like a kind of lack where you're not doing what you need to do to have higher capacity. You're just bored, right? So let's do something else. Let's do something new, right? So newness can be something we seek out of some sort of failed cultivation of virtue, right? You could also have, let's go beyond ourselves, because you say, oh, this is old and outdated and rusty, and let's make it new and fresh. Well, that could just be like economics or markets, right? Let's make it fresh, right? Well, at the same time, if you don't go beyond yourself, you're dead, right? What doesn't advance? What doesn't go through time other than something that's stagnant and uncreative, right? All right, well, that's very odd then. So how do you have a going beyond oneself that is sublative? Well, in Hegel, it's going to be a negation, sublation. Well, isn't it funny? Beauty brings a judgment. So it is a negation, but beauty also suggests a sublation. They're two sides of the same coin. My favorite example of this that I'll use quite often is the Beatrice smile in the Paradiso, where Dante asks Beatrice, why aren't you smiling? And she's like, well, at this level, if I smile, it will reduce you to ash, like Simli, like a creature out of Lovecraft, right? That's very odd. Basically, it's saying if beauty shines too quickly, it reduces you to ash and kills you. But also the experience of the smile inspires Dante in his recognition of inadequacy to get better, to handle more of the smile. So beauty as a judge and an inspirer, that is precisely what we need to think if we want to talk about the grounds for going beyond ourselves, that is for the right reasons, that is in the right place, as opposed to, because the key to beauty is it is external, but it also feels internal at the same time. It feels like it's work, like you were just saying with the pregnant mother. You feel like there's something inside of you that is kindled by the sight,
This is unique to beauty. It does not feel entirely external. Whereas if I guilt you and say, well, the law is you shouldn't steal, it can feel very external to you, right? You may want to do something, but morally I say you shouldn't. So it's external. Beauty is this movement toward the internal that's working on some sort of internal capacity that comes alive, but is at the same time a mystery to you. Well, this is midlife's journey now. Proust had that lovely line, Remembrance of Time Past, where he said, life is not so much a journey to a destination, but a process of the kindling of new eyes. And I think that is a lot of what it means to go beyond oneself. It's the capacity to see what's in front of you in a different way. And that is something about beauty. That is something about the mystical. That is something about that of which is not going to fit neatly into a conventional box, because if it did, then beauty would lose its power. Like beauty can't fit into a conventional box because then it's not a mystery. It's known, right? It has to be unknown, but not unknowable. This is the trick. If I say that mountain range there is unknowable, then you go, oh, okay, and give up. But if I say it's unknown, ooh, it's an adventure, something to do, right? Beauty presents itself not as unknowable, but unknown. And as unknown, it judges you for why don't you know it? Why don't you do more to know it? While simultaneously saying there is something to know. And what I would say, to me, this is all relevant for me to the question of, and then I'll pass it back to you, of Christianity. Because I do think we've talked about it before, I think we make a massive mistake when we conflate Paul with the gospel and say it's all the New Testament, as opposed to saying there's the First Testament, Second Testament, and Third Testament. And the Third Testament is Paul, who is not merely providing commentary on the Gospels of Jesus, but working out, tarrying with the uncertainty of what it means to be a Christian in areas that Jesus did not explicitly teach on, while trying to live among people who are not Christian, while simultaneously being true and authentic to the tradition of Judaism. The reason why this is important is because you can say that Paul is in the business of trying to figure out how to move Christians into experiences of beauty. Communities of Holy Spirit would be communities of beauty, places that are actually cultivating beauty in the neighbor and with one another, that would inspire people to, on midlife's journey, to so cultivate. And if we take that logic that I put forth, we basically are still in the Third Testament. Like the Third Testament really didn't end. Like Paul's process of tearing with and thinking through continued. Cadell was just saying at Philosophy Portal yesterday, and I completely agree. There's a way in which the history of philosophy and thought is simply a continuation of wrestling with the revelation of Christ through, say, Christian atheism, through secularism, and you're still trying to tarry what it means that this experience occurred. Because obviously the person of Christ has a unique role in Western thought, right? For good and for bad. But there's a certain tearing with what that means. I think that's what Paul actually gives us a model of. I'm happy to go into detail on that. I know we've spoken to that before. But let me put it this way. We cannot think the Third Testament if we don't think beauty. Because otherwise, all you have is what? Dogma and ethics. All right, well, then what you read Paul is doing is laying down what? Ethics, moral rights and wrongs, not tearing with processes and how to create communities of beauty, right? So we can't think a Third Testament unless we have beauty play a central role that is not permissive. It's not saying, oh, you can do whatever you want, because beauty judges you. Like Cardinal Newman taught, it is organizing you toward the righteous, but doing so in a way that is not reducible to simple universal ethical principles, but situational reasoning that has to be tarried with one by one, and the negativity of difficulty of being in the presence of the neighbor who may not fully understand you, and yet you have to love them and figure out how to work with them, right? So I think without a robust doctrine of beauty, it is very difficult to understand Paul as a Third Testament, and it is very difficult to think about we today continuing in the process that Paul models of a Christianity going beyond itself or unfolding through history as a historical process to come to terms with the revelation of the person of Christ and what it means to have communities of Holy Spirit today. So I think beauty is right on it. And I guess what I was saying is Cardinal Newman is lovely on that, because he also talks about, like, when you go before God, the judgment of God is his magnificence. And in the same way, if I told you, hey, an ambassador is coming to your house, wouldn't you take a bath? If you knew that like a really famous person was coming by, you would not dress like a slob. You would clean up, right? Well, likewise before, not because of like fear or whatever, it's just like, yeah, that's what you do. Well, likewise before God, one cleans up per se, not out of guilt or anything, but simply as a testament to the ritual of the magnificence of the beatific vision you are before. And I think when we think of it that way, you can see how beauty and judgment go together. But then lastly, this also means, though, beauty is dangerous. Precisely in being so powerful, if you see too much of it too quickly, it can destroy you, right? It can be Beatrice's smile can reduce you to ash like a Lovecraft creature. So then we need communities by which to train one another to be able to handle greater and greater capacities of beauty at a rate that can inspire us, not overwhelm us with our inadequacy. And then, of course, the problem is if we knew how not to be inadequate before beauty, wouldn't we have already done it? So there's a process of exploration that needs the other to help us see things that we might be looking at but don't see. And that's where I think Paul modeling these communities of Holy Spirit is so important. So I think beauty is a very relevant topic to this question of a Christianity beyond itself, because again, I don't see anything else that would compel someone to go beyond themselves that wouldn't be moralizing or force-based or threat-based. But beauty has this magical, this bothness of inspiring and judging at the same time that does not feel overly dogmatic.
Yeah, very well put. And I'm struck by how in that explanation, the project of a Christianity beyond itself feels much more in continuity.
Yeah.
Than has been apparent to me thus far in the project. Like for the most part, it's felt like the intersections it's occupying are so radically different in cultural vibe to the Christianity we receive now, what we would be in continuity with, that it's hard to see those kind of as that the project itself is somehow true to that sense of something that is unfolding through time. As I was in that church, I stepped out of the chapel after having, my somewhat beatific experience. I went and I stood and I looked up at this amazing work of art, which was sort of occupying the entire back wall of the church. And it was the image of a temple, but the temple was kind of potted. And then between the potting is the clouds, and the potting of the clouds then holds within it a stained glass window. And in the middle of the stained glass window is the dove of the Holy Spirit. And there's just like light rays kind of coming out in every direction. And I stood and gazed at that for quite some time, and the sensation, the insight that was coming through was a very, very distinct sense that the depth of Christianity itself is almost unknowable. Like the depth of seeing that is cultivated through the course of walking that path goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And with that deeper cultivation of beauty, amongst other things, a capacity to see more. So there's kind of a cultivation of the vision of being the vessel that can kind of see into and through these things. And I think from that place, the artwork, the iconography, the ritual, the Eucharist, and things like that start to really just become sort of cosmic poetry. But at the same time, there's this grief that must be confronted, which is something like, this is so, like, as you kind of break out of the modern malaise and you start to see deeply into it and you feel the beauty and you're struck by it and you weep before the judge of the beauty of this, and you think about the artisans who were so inspired to create it, how could this ideal die? How could like the most beautiful ideal we could possibly garner die? How could we kind of devote ourselves so fully to something and have it then die and become emptied? And so there's this strange sort of holographic fractal resonance between the death of Christ Yeshua as the beautiful ideal and the processes that the disciples undergo of like grieving that, and then the resurrection through that, and then the death of Christianity as a like 2 millennia project of human life to also undergo a death, to grieve that death fully, and then to like what may be resurrected through that. And so then there's this kind of there's this bidirectional seeing that comes through this, where there's the more obvious but much more culturally pioneering Christianity beyond itself that I've been speaking about, that is, you know, foreign to most Christians, and is about this kind of flourishing of a Christ infused culture, or a variety of range of cultures, in myriad domains that are not so confined to the temple. But then there's also this like looking back, looking down, looking in, and continuing to go down and in and deeper and see deeper and see deeper and see deeper into what has been, and what has been given to us. So that's kind of opening up a new temporal axis for what this project means for me.
Yep. No, outstanding. A few things come to mind. So there's always been this kind of tension in art with artists, for example, where they go, well, I don't want to read other novels because I don't want my art to be influenced by other people. I want to have pure creativity, right? So you avoid reading so that you have pure creativity. And then there's the other side of it that says, no, I'm going to read everything I possibly can because creativity emerges out of this concert of voices within me that will inherently be new, because that combination of different voices plus me is where creativity comes from. Creativity is not a process of avoiding what has been to keep your creativity pure, but going all in what has been and believing that some sort of synthesis and emergence will come out of that otherwise could not have come out with, right? I think a similar thing applies to this kind of funny idea of Christianity and its kind of understanding of history. It's like the way that you move forward into a new future is by some sort of simultaneous honoring of the past that you interpret in light of today. That then is where creativity comes from. And that, it does. Zizek has that idea where he flips Marx, where Marx says, the point is not to interpret the world, but to change it. But, Zizek's like, no, well, actually, we need to interpret the world. Funny enough, the more you focus on interpreting what has been, the better you get at changing things, because you have a clear sense of the situation. And I think many, like Judaism has that tradition, like that idea of, well, actually, there's something about really studying and trying to tarry with what the past did that actually makes us more likely to create a better future, or a future that is actually going to be more human versus maybe an AI Landian future that the human doesn't get out of, per se. That's kind of the Landian question. Nick Land asks us, will the future be something the human gets through? And that's a $1 million question with AI and singularity and different things. Well, there's this tradition that it's like the probability of humans getting through the future, oddly, is tied with their willingness to tarry with the past and to work through interpreting the past in light of today, because that's an act of sublation, negation, sublation in a Hegelian sense. And again, if it is the case, I do think that the best artists don't avoid influence. They, in fact, embrace it foolhardy. They make themselves students to the masters that came before. They really try to understand the previous masters. And those are the ones who tend to create the new books or the great new work, right? I think similar things apply to society. It's those who really, really try to tarry with history, tarry with old text, tarry with religions. Like if you just assume, okay, this may seem dogmatic and bigoted to me, but let me assume that these people at the time they wrote these texts had a reason for what they were doing. Maybe there's something here that I don't quite see. That maybe at the end you still conclude they're bigoted, but that act of humility and then really trying to tarry with their world seems to have creative possibilities that otherwise don't arise, right? I do think also it's just like we talk all the time, especially with Cadell at Philosophy Portal, where like basically it seems like the science of logic was missed. I think the counter-enlightenment, the Scottish Enlightenment, the modern counter-enlightenment, I think there's this whole strain of philosophy and metaphysics that was completely overlooked. Well, if you never went to honor the past, you'd never find it. And then I think philosophy, ironically, by missing this stream of thought, just ended up with philosophy as trolley problems, and studying the history of philosophy and neo-pragmatism and philosophy seemed dead. Well, yeah, because philosophy stopped really wrestling with the old books, dang it, because, there There's just interpretation. There's just these forms of philosophy said that there's no need to do that. Well, that doesn't seem to have been good for the future of philosophy. Now that you have these efforts online where philosophy is really trying to go to the past, now suddenly it's like philosophy hasn't even started. It's like it's just starting. Well, that came out of an effort to find things in the past. Well, and that now it feels like philosophy is finally starting. The claim of Christianity as a hermeneutic is that that is the truth. There is something about trying to understand the old in light of the new and reason through that dialectic that is the secret to human flourishing. You know, there's always this question in theology between revelation and reason, right? Is it reason or revelation, right? Well, the idea is that revelation is locked in history and you have to reason to it, but reason can never capture it, but you need to try and you need to reason in light of it in the current moment. And that's what Paul's doing. Okay, Jesus was the revelation. We're going into Corinth. Let's reason what that would mean with these people who don't know who Jesus is, and yet we're going to be true to them. So there's a reasoning, right? There's an active, we're not going to ignore what happened in the past. We're going to treat it as having an authority, but also it is not an authority that gives us clear direction on what to do in this situation. We have to reason through it anew, and we have to tarry with that, oh, and we may mess up. And like you do, you have, like you see in Paul, a kind of experimental sort of, it's like, okay, well, let's try this. All right, well, let's try this. Let's see if this works. You have that's going on, right? And it's like, you know, let's see if this works because this would make sense if Jesus was God and he said this, and this was the situation, this would make sense, right? So you can't have, in that question of reason and revelation, you see a theory of interpretation that I think actually is being implemented regarding philosophy today that has led to a feeling that philosophy is actually just getting started online, that if we were to implement that more widely, and then, of course, reapply it to Christianity, could help Christianity go beyond itself. And funny enough, in going beyond itself, it continues itself. Because I do think a weird dimension of Christianity is that if you, like you were saying, there's this feeling of continuation. Christianity has something built into it of a going beyond itself. Like it, in its very orthodoxy, it has the God can show up and surprise you. Like it has that in it because like in the middle of Judaism, God shows up. Oh, so Judaism went beyond itself in Christ, right? Like, and then it's like, oh, and now the Holy Spirit is here. So there's in the very orthodoxy of Christianity is a mechanism of going beyond itself, right? But then Paul is modeling what it looks like to believe in the continual unfolding of that going beyond itself regarding situations and theology that Christ does not directly speak on and yet has implications for, right? The reason I say all this is because then Paul is full to the brim of philosophy. He's clearly trained in philosophy. He's philosophically reasoning. Plato's side. He knows the Greeks. He knows the pre-Socratics. He is reasoning, and he, of course, knows the Jewish tradition. He is reasoningly live. He is politically savvy. He is quite the lawyer in the book of Acts. He is a smart man. He is using all the resources he has to bear on these questions of what is this community of Holy Spirit that's active and alive. Right? But in that process, you have the simultaneous, he is not the artist that's saying, I'm gonna abandon the Torah. I don't want to be influenced by the history of Judaism anymore. Jesus showed up, so Judaism doesn't matter. It's now just Jesus. American Christianity went astray basically when it was over-Hellenized. It was over-inspired by Cartesianism, or at least the popularly understood version of Descartes. Pavio does very good work to argue that we misunderstand Descartes. That's perfectly fine. But Christianity, and I think he's right. I think Pavio is right, and he's quite the scholar. But there's this idea that Christianity was read through a dualism. Then it was mixed together with a certain kind of, well, we don't actually need to study the past because if we just believe in Jesus, then we'll be saved, and that's really what we need to do. So there was this kind of movement away from covering ourselves in the void, like really listening to the entire concert of human history and voices and learning to try to bear on these questions that then, funny enough, led to a kind of Christianity that I don't think is modeled in Paul. I think we see modeled in Paul someone who's really bringing all voices and all thought to bear on the question, but a theology developed in Christianity that then actually made it holier to not do that, to actually just say, no, we don't need philosophy, we just need to have faith. No, we don't need to worry about this world because we'll be saved and pulled to heaven. And again, a very good popular theologian, but his academic works are extremely good, N.T. Wright, basically says the entire doctrine of resurrection and rapture and going to heaven is all based on a Hellenization of Christianity.
Cartesianism, out-of-bodiness, which the Jewish mind would not have supported, because in the Jewish mind, some Jews didn't even believe in an afterlife. They believed in God, but they didn't believe in an afterlife. They did not have an idea that heaven is a separate realm from earth. Heaven is the presence of God, and God comes down to earth, and he's building the temple on earth, right? Supernatural means the supernatural. The natural is made super. It is not a going beyond the natural. The resurrection of the body is the resurrection of the body, not the soul out of body. It's literally the making all things new of the physical, right? Well, if that's what you think, you're going to bring all of history, all thought of everything to bear on the question of what was revelation, because all of this is going to be made new. So you're going to bring all of this to try to figure out what it is that Jesus was doing and what it means to alive. And a way for Christianity to continue to go beyond itself means you bring all of creation into the question of thinking Christianity, environmentalism, politics, law, philosophy, everything in community. You bring it all to bear on the question. And that's what Paul is doing. But unfortunately, because we were over-influenced, and by Hellenization, that just means Greek categories, like Karl Barth is big on that. Like there's all these kind of Greek out of like cheap Platonism. I think actual Platonism is not the cheap Platonism that has been so popular, but this kind of perfect realm sort of thinking. All of that came to bear on the interpretations of Paul. And so Paul became a commentary on the cross, that is the process of out-of-bodiness, versus thinking and tearing through the revelation that Christ presents to think it through our particular life situation in communities of Holy Spirit today. And I say all of that because basically beauty has no place in a, like beauty makes no sense as a category unless you're thinking communities of Holy Spirit that you're bringing everything to tarry with and to think through. Like I said, on this idea of artists who are kind of like, no, I don't want to be influenced. I just want to have pure creativity. Well, there was a movement in Christianity basically against beauty, where, you know, there was a point where the early Karl Barth is like, when we go to church, make sure there's no stained glass windows, make sure there's no, because we want to really focus on the text, the word. We don't want any beauty, right? We don't want to be distracted by things that could take us away from the word, like the art in different things, right? Because that's basically the artist saying we don't want to be influenced by other writers into losing our creativity. It's like, likewise, we don't want to be distracted by beauty from getting the depth of the word, of the Bible, right? But it's actually Paul is modeling the exact opposite. You need all the beauty, truth, and goodness you can possibly get from all possible sources to bear on the question of revelation, right? So another issue that happened is American theology, in a American Christian, and then I'll give it back to you, Christian theology went a direction of removing distractions, is how they would have said. We're removing the distractions of philosophy, history, and art to get to the word, right? But in the great irony is that that activity of removing distraction was actually removing the material needed to do what Paul was doing. And so we can't think Christianity because you need all of creation. You need all of everything that has been brought to actually be continuing the model that Paul presents. And then then the experience of beauty becomes a sign that you're doing it right. Like for many theologians, beauty is, oh my gosh, you're distracted by beauty. No, beauty is a sign of grace that you're on the right track. And actually, but here's the funny thing, in being on the right track, it simultaneously judges you as doing more. So it resists becoming an idol. That's the trick. Like it resists becoming an idol because an idol is, you know, a kind of divine power that you control under your own pride. Whereas beauty, yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful, but it simultaneously says you can do more. So it doesn't fall into idolatry in ways that previous forms could. So I think all of what you're saying suggests a history of Christianity that has become very moving everything away, that's distracting us from the word, which ironically has removed the resources we need to actually get at the word. And if you do that, what you see is a Christianity that is fundamentally moving beyond itself as an unfolding of that revelation through history. So I think everything that you were saying is very, very relevant.
Yeah, I'm struck. I'll almost confess, well, I don't think it's a confession here, but really an observation of my own journeying into this over the last many years is that I haven't felt called to study the text. And for a lot of people, that's going to be like a get this guy out of here. But I have faith in something prior to that. I have faith in the intuitive unfoldment of what I'm actually drawn to. I have faith in the beauty ultimately. And in pursuit of that, this powerful Christian mystery has been speaking to me in various ways, sometimes unorthodox, sometimes more orthodox. But in any case, I've been drawn to relate to this through the beauty of the art more than through the beauty of the word. It's also a reality of the cultural waters that we're in, that in a certain sense, the word is in the very air. It's like the milieu that we're in. And so even without sitting down with my Bible every night, that I'm sort of inescapably inside of those stories. The mythos of it already seems to flow through. But for me, it also points to that sense of reading the word of my own life as closely as possible. And no doubt at some point there will be a juncture in which I'm really called to go in on the words of the gospel again. I mean, I read them as a child, but for the time being, it's the reading of the word of the world. It's the reading of the beauty in my own life that is revelatory and is drawing me deeper and deeper into these sort of, heart-rending mysteries. And I'm struck by this sense with Catholicism of this being a vessel which holds so much of the beauty, and also the adherent of Catholicism feels heavy to me for the most part. There's a heaviness. It feels like somewhere between the going down and the going beyond. A lot of Catholicism seems to circle around the grief zone in the middle. And it's kind of an open question for me, because sometimes these revelatory moments for me are about going deeper, coming closer. And I sense that there's this continual journey of getting closer to the grief of Mary Mother, or coming closer to the experience of the cross, which rightly brings you into that kind of Catholic posture. But then there's also a kind of going beyond that. There's a kind of walking out of the tomb. And whether that really occurs is not always clear.
Yeah, no, well, there's a few things. Generally speaking, Catholicism has emphasized a sacramental ontology, we might call it, which is the idea, I think Flannery O'Connor put it very well. And she was resisting symbols in literature where people were just turning, oh, that hat is a symbol for X, Y, and Z. And she's like, no, the artist isn't symbol creation. If you're a Christian, then you believe that if you accurately described a tree, that would fundamentally point to God, because everything was made by God. So everything, if accurately described and accurately encountered, would have a sacramental function. She thought like symbols in literature were kind of counterfeit of sacraments. And so she thought the artist should really just focus on telling a really good story that accurately describes the human condition as it accurately is and nature as it really is. Otherwise, you're actually not going to, one as a Christian might be saying, well, let me make sure there are some Christian symbols in the story. So he was like, that's the best way to not make a Christian story. If you believe God made the world and that the God is Trinity, then you just need to accurately describe reality and it will inherently unveil God. That accurate, like an accurate description of creation is a revelation. Like, it's not that revelation is just in the book, but creation itself is revelatory. Some will say it's the book of nature and the book of the word, right? And of course, and Joel has made this point in his book, The Natural Theologian, is the idea, and this is based on Saul Krimsky, when the Bible talks about donkeys, it kind of assumes you know what a donkey is. It doesn't give you the definition. The Bible would not make any sense unless you brought to it knowledge of experience, right? So right there, you can't separate the Bible from the world, right? The Bible assumes knowledge of the world, right? The question is simply the relationship. Is it one for one, like how, like authority, which has more authority, so on and so forth, right? That's the kind of challenge. Also keep in mind, and I think this is very, very important, originally, the Bible, the Gospel, the Torah, these things are like, the King's was like a giant scroll, but a lot of times it was oral, right? So your experience of the Bible would not have been words on a page, black marks on white. It would have been invisible words in the air to a backdrop of nature, right? Like it would not have been this experience of words on a page. You would have heard sounds that may have bordered on music while the wind was billowing through the trees and you were standing on grass and you were with the community. Like the experience of the word in an oral tradition is much harder to separate from nature because there's no piece of paper on which you're reading off of. You are in nature and in the world as you are hearing the word, right? So like that, if we think of the world, creation, as the paper on which the words are said in versus the paper on which the words are written, then you get this kind of better relationship where revelation and reason are fundamentally dialectical. Like you can only understand revelation if you've had experiences, but then the Bible is also saying, hey, you need to read me to have an idea of what kind of experiences you should seek. And this is why it becomes a bothness, right? Like if Jesus doesn't say, love your neighbor as yourself, well, why would you go have that experience? Because it's hard. And the very fact it's hard would maybe say to you, you shouldn't do it, that it's irrational to do because it's difficult and they're your enemy and they want to destroy you. So why would you put yourself through that experience? Well, because the Bible says so. Okay. So there's a way in which the Bible is to inform experience, and experience is necessary to understand the Bible. Well, what ends up happening is it's very difficult for we as human beings to not be impoverished in one area or the other. You know, you have some Christians that can recite Bible verses off the top of their head, but they might be lacking on experience. And then you can have people that have had many, many experiences, but they don't have any books or words or thought by which to articulate what they've experienced in something they can understand and deepen, right? Like one of the beauties of thought is often the best ideas when you read them, you're like, I've thought about that, but I've never been able to put it into words. Like the best thoughts are often things you know, but did not understand or could not articulate. And then when you hear it, you go, that's it. And you feel like an intuition come to life, right? Well, in order to have that occur, you need both the text, revelation, the Bible, and you need experience, right? And God uses both. And the Catholic Church, to go back to that, basically the Catholic Church has held the position that revelation and reason must be in concert with one another, okay? And they also will go through, like, how else do you decide what books are going to be in the Bible other than a tradition? And if there's a tradition, you have to be using reason. And also, Jesus is actually, we always have to remember that it's the historical person of Jesus that's revelation, not the Bible, right? That's all, like, Karl Barth was big on that too, where Jesus is the revelation, not the Bible, only the Bible in so much as it participates in the person of Jesus. Well, what parts of it do and what points doing and what way, right? Looks like a lifelong journey of scholarship there. But the idea is that if Jesus is the revelation, but the only way we know Jesus is through a book, well, then there has to be a dialectic between reason and revelation. That's what the Catholicism would emphasize. And I think there's plenty of Protestantism that does that as well. But then Protestantism is an interesting case study in all the different directions it went in. Anyway, if that is so, though, then in order for revelation and reason to have that relationship, there must be a metaphysic that make it possible. Like the nature of reality has to be such in which that dialectic would be possible, right? And that means you have to have a sacramental metaphysics where the supernatural and the natural are two sides of the same coin, where reason is informed by revelation, even if by a glass darkly, and revelation is understood by reason, even if never completely, but there has to be the possibility of a relationship. You see what I'm saying? So reality has to, in its metaphysic, entail relationship, right? So that's where you get a sacramental ontology. It's just kind of what follows. And then you can, obviously the key thinker in Catholicism is Aquinas, Thomism, and then there are neo-Thomists, et cetera, so forth. But relation has to be central. And then, of course, this is where you start getting into the Trinity, because you say, all right, well, if the metaphysics of reality have to be relational and creation is in the image and likeness of God, wouldn't that mean there's relation in God? And so, and then you see because it all has to have an isomorphic structure all the way down, following Genesis 1:3, right? Okay, well, if that's the case, then we today, if one wants to continue in the unfolding of that Christianity, have to have a relation between experience and the text, right? And therefore, the Christian would make a mistake to overstate and say, well, going out and getting experiences, if you're not getting to the word, that could be a problem. Well, but you can't understand the word without experiences. The issue is that one goes through life without ever honoring both sides. The fact that at one period you emphasize one side versus the other, well, that's just because we're sequential beings, right? I think, honestly, if one genuinely seeks the truth, there is a natural process through life where interest grows in the areas that it's supposed to go in at times. And when you get to the place where you're finally ready to go into the Bible in a manner that is not preset by previous forms, that day comes up. That fruit comes up, and you eat that fruit. And then actually, because you did all of the diligent seeking him in life in terms of experience, then you're able to see the text with new eyes. The last thing I'll say is it makes me think of, I think it was John Baer, and he was kind of describing the way that the Bible is kind of read in a Christian hermeneutic or text in general. And he says, when they're walking on the trail after Jesus' death, and a third comes up beside them and they're walking, and it's not till he breaks bread, they go, oh my gosh, that's Jesus. They couldn't see it, right? Or when Mary's in the garden and thinks Jesus is the gardener, and it's not till this moment and there's like, oh, it's Jesus. There's this flare up, right? And then you can see what's there. What he was saying is that the way Athanasius and them kind of put together the Bible was kind of like, they're looking through all these Gnostic texts, they're looking through the Bible, but it wasn't until certain texts that a thing came alive based on their actual encounter with Jesus or the stories that they heard. Then it's like, oh, this is Jesus here and not here, but this is Jesus here and not here. There's this kind of flaring of life, so there's a kindling of eyes, okay? Well, funny enough, that kindling of eyes requires experience. Like, you cannot have things come forth to you. Suddenly you see that third on the road is Jesus. He was there the whole time. Well, if you don't have the experiences, you can't see it, right? So that's where, if you want to have that kindling experience, which I would say is akin to the experience of beauty. Bam, there's beauty. You see it. Bam, there it is. Kindle, right? Oh my gosh, the gardener's Jesus. He was right there. There he is. Bam, that experience of coming forth, that is what one is looking for when you read. That is the experience that you're looking for when you read. Yeah. When something comes forth, but that coming forth is not possible without experience, without a dialectic between reason and revelation. And also, the last thing I'll say is you're not looking for things to come forth if you don't believe in a continual unfolding. Like, if you don't believe in a continual unfolding, then everything that's going to come forth or needs to come forth is forth. There's nothing to look for. You just need to stay true to what has been, right? Well, now we're overly indexing the past. Now we're overly indexing the nostalgic. We're not in the Hegelian, Zizekian interpretation, Paulian work of looking to the past for the now. We're looking to the past to escape the now. We're not looking to the past to inspire the now. We're looking to the past to escape the now. Or the other side is we don't need the past because the now is better than the past and all those guys are stupid, right? We don't want to have, we as an artist don't want to be influenced by other voices. That's going to hinder our creativity. There's a ditch on either side of the road. And I think that hermeneutic of the coming forth from John Baer is a critical way to sort of think why one needs both the experience and the word. And the reason I say all of that as well is because I think when it's time to look at the book of John, it's time to look at the Bible, it will just come forth. It'll just come forth. It just kind of signs forth on you. And I think actually, I think many Christians actually can moralize the text without incubating or providing infrastructures for the experiences to undergo the experience of the text coming forth as such, so it doesn't light a flame in them. And then it doesn't also bring with it a sort of inspiration to participate in the work of the Holy Spirit. So I think what you're saying has a historical precedent in those ways.
Yeah. I think what I first want to appreciate in what you're saying, Daniel, is the way in which you've kind of situated the text in relationship to the earth or it's a direct experience, that the text is ultimately kind of, in some way, it's pointing through to something which at the primary level occurred experientially for some people at some time.
Yes.
And therefore, insofar as that text is going to be useful to us, it's going to be something that points us again through to experience itself, to the possibility of something occurring in experience. I've been watching the show The Chosen, a show that was made recently. It's a depiction of the life of Christ. It's not just about Christ. It's kind of the whole, it explores the Romans and the Pharisees and various side stories and quests and so on. But it's a really potent show for me at this time, encountering it, because it's been very well made. And they've really captured that sense of the penetration of mystery into the world. And you can really feel that, like the way they've really kind of cadenced the show. You have these moments and you have these experiences of like relative normalcy, and then something happens that defies the reasoning, and it's so moving. And for me, the first episode I watched it, there's this scene at the end of the episode, it's just kind of following side quests. It's following this woman, kind of Mary Magdalene, as someone who's like possessed by demons and living in a brothel house and all this stuff. And then at the end of the episode, Jesus kind of appears to her, and it hit me so deep. It hit me with the same degree of emotional intensity as if I had, it had happened behind my eyes, like in my third eye, I had encountered Jesus. So that is just like, don't even know what to make of that, to be honest. But it speaks to the beauty component of this, and that sense of the beauty of the judge. It's like I'm being called to the beauty, the truth of the beauty first and foremost.
Yep.
And that's the thing that is guiding and indicating to me. And if something is just like absolutely earthquakingly beautiful, then I consider that to be pointing me towards a truth. And obviously that needs to be thought through and worked out, but that's kind of the root experience that is guiding navigation for me at this point. And that to me is just it's a stonking revelatory thing, which again and again, like despite having the Christian tradition, despite having the Bible, the sense that there is something fundamentally mysterious going on, we seem to just lose it again and again and again and again. It's such a evasive phenomenon. It's such an evasive reality for us. And it's also at the same time the core animating story of our culture. And that's very curious. And it's like you can know it and you can know it and you can know it, but until that actual moment of like the blistering, heart-rending encounter with it, then it's like all of that almost didn't count. All of that wasn't really the thing, because you didn't actually feel like, oh, this isn't just a story. This is kind of the eye of the heart is seeing through into some foundational truth of the nature of reality, not just as an abstraction, not as a model, not as a metaphysic, but as something that you yourself are embedded in. And that gets into whole other terrains, like, what is the miraculous? Obviously, we have our own, many people have experiences of grace or miraculous turnings in their own lives, but how far do you take that? How far do you hold that? And to what extent is the possibility of that actually conditioned upon your openness to the possibility of that as well? In other words, if you are completely closed to the possibility of the mystery moving in your life, then are you less likely to experience it? And if you are more open or attuned to the possibility of mystery moving in your life or the miraculous, does that necessitate that it's more possible? It seems on some level, yes, but there's also millions of people who, you know, believe in miracles and maybe aren't experiencing miracles. So it's like how to hold that all together. But I guess I'm circling back to this again and again, because it's like this is kind of the core thing I'm trying to get to, which feels like it's looking through Christianity. It's that experience of looking through it into that which is beyond it, to the point of supersaturation, where this is actually, oh, like, no, that's not a thing over there. It's that which I am in as well. And now how can I walk out into the world from that place?
Outstanding. So there's a few things that come to mind. First off, it should be noted with the miracles. You know, it's interesting because Jesus resurrects Lazarus, and I think we were speaking, and then they want to kill him, right? Like he heals a blind man, the Pharisees, like, so what? He's like a devil, right? Like one of the things we need to realize is that in the context of Jesus doing miracles, they're often seen as like really bad. Like, oh my gosh, you're doing these terrible things. Like for the downtrodden, it's seen as great. Oh my gosh, he's healing us. It also should be noted how few miracles Jesus does, actually. Like if you think about it, he doesn't really actually do that many, and he's often quite reluctant. And then often too, he's just seen as a magician or a demon, right? Like we have this tendency today to associate miracle as proof of the divine, or proof, like if you had a miracle occur, you would definitely say, oh, that was God, or it would be proof of God. But that's not actually what we see so much in the text. We also see that miracles tend to be done in service of those for whom the powers that be would think that miracles are least reserved for. Like, why would you do miracles for these people? These are the downtrodden. These aren't the kings and the queen. Like, these are the least. And you're doing miracles for them? It's wasted. Why aren't you doing it on, why aren't you doing it for the higher up or to fight? Like, Jesus doesn't do, like, miracles to stop Rome. Why didn't he do that, jerk? Like, he's just a show off, right? So it's interesting, too, because miracles are in service of a downtrodden. And also they function as signs to the work that Christ is doing in the world through creation for the coming of new creation, not merely for individual embetterment. Because that's the other issue, is that miracles are, well, because that's the temptation of Satan with Jesus in the wilderness. He's like, why not do a miracle to turn these stones to bread? Because I can't do miracles to serve myself. Why not jump from this tower and, have the angels catch you? He's like, no, the Father wants me to go through subjective destitution, right? I have to go through the cross. Well, that's really important because it shows that miracles are not done to deal with your immediate problems. They're not just to serve you. You also can't use miracles to avoid subjective destitution or your cross, because that's basically what Satan is tempting Jesus, is he's going, hey, why not just, become Lord of the world without dying on the cross? If God just wants you to rule the world or whatever, why, I can do it for you right now. And he's like, no, I have to go through death. So what's very important too is that, the Second Testament gives us very interesting parameters for what in the miraculous occurs. Right? It's not just like that. It's in the context of you can't be avoiding difficulty. You can't be avoiding your cross. It can't be for self-service. It can't be for power. It has to be in service of pointing toward the new creation, like resurrection. Miracles are always in service of new creation, right? And if you look around and you say, well, what could be in service of new creation? Well, if the medievals were looking at a cathedral, if they were listening to Angus Dew, they'd be like, yep, that's new creation. That's miraculous, right? And there is this kind of idea that there's this growing sense of the miraculous around us. But you see, I think the hunger for miracles actually goes up when you lose beauty. The more and more you have beauty, or you can encounter beauty, and also the more and more you're able to face and take up your cross, you don't get this hunger for the miraculous because you see the miraculous all around you all the time, right? And also, like when it comes to things like, because you also then understand that you yourself, if Christ has to go through suffering and death and weariness and hunger, then the more and more you come to terms with that, the more and more you realize a miracle that got you out of those things may actually be removing you from the place where you can be made like Christ, right? So your relationship to miracles changes. And I think basically a lot of the tradition will be is that the miraculous is not in your power.
The miraculous comes and goes in so much as it can, like a good example, whether it's true or not, I think it kind of highlights the idea. Like there's that idea of the Azura Street, which was kind of the birth of a new church movement in the beginning of the 19th century, black churches, Pentecostalism kind of thing. It was the idea that there was this miraculous occurrence that occurred. Well, what's interesting is where that miracle occurred actually began an entire social movement, right? Not just kind of an individual having something occur. Now, you do also have the history of saints and different things you can go into, I understand. But what's interesting is going through, I mean, there are stories of Saint Teresa kind of getting annoyed if she was levitating, right? Like, oh, this miracle again. Gosh, she hated levitation or something, right? So it's just very interesting is I think we have to think of miracle as something within God's will and power pointing toward new creation, pointing toward the making of a new creation. But again, if you don't have a dialectic between reason and revelation, creation and God, supernatural as the natural made super or growth or beauty, then you can't think of the miraculous that way. You have to think of the miraculous as pulling you out of the world, as opposed to helping in the making new, the creation of the world, right? So that's another issue. And in fact, if you make that mistake, I do think you end up with the Grand Inquisitor with Dostoevsky, where, you know, Jesus shows up and the brothers Karamazov, the Grand Inquisitor says, hey, tomorrow we're going to crucify you because we don't actually, the church actually doesn't want you, Jesus. We don't really want you, because you know what people want? They want miracles, they want bread, and they want authority. They want to be told what to do. But you gave us free will. You know, this is where Ivan Illich is like, because Ivan asks Alyosha, why do bad things happen? And Alyosha basically says free will. And Ivan's like, but free will sucks. We don't want free will. You know, you're telling me that God gave us free will and that's why there's evil. That's a terrible trade. And so the idea is that the Grand Inquisitor is like, Jesus, you gave man freedom. You gave man, you know, his own free will, but that's not what man wants. Man wants to be told what to do. Man wants bread, and they want miracles. They want miracles because then they don't have to do it. They can just know what to do because miracle is occurring. And basically the Grand Inquisitor is like, we, the church, because Dostoevsky is critiquing the church, he's like, we'll provide that. We'll provide miracles. We'll provide bread, and we'll tell people what to do. So we're going to crucify you, Jesus, because we don't want you anymore, right? So another issue is that there is something in human beings that is seeking the miraculous, but without a society or church that is creating spaces of beauty, it becomes a disordered privation that turns into a pathology for the miraculous that is ultimately a pathology for magic, almost pagan magic. It becomes a kind of return to something that the church is trying to correct, which is the hunger for magic and magicians in the kind of negative way, right? And so if you don't have beauty, which there's a natural hunger in human beings for beauty, I do think it gets distorted for a hunger for the magical, which then actually functions to help us avoid taking up our cross, subjective destitution, and things like that. And I think a lot of the American church, unfortunately, has gone in the direction of the magic, but not the good magic. I'm talking kind of the power magic, the kind of controlling things kind of magic that has led to a failure to be Christ-like and to do the work of creating spaces of beauty and things like that. And so I think that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. I think also I would also note as a point, and then I'll pause here and give it back to you. I think if Paul was alive today, and I cannot prove this, but Paul would go into churches, because I do think he's very much a kind of church planner, and it just gets to some of the things you were saying first. If he walked into churches, looked around and said, doesn't seem like people are experiencing much beauty here. Doesn't seem like the Holy Spirit is moving. Seems like people are becoming pathological and actually mentally ill. He would be like, we need to change how church is done. Like, this is the thing. Like, so for example, most churches are sermon based. You know, they're about 40 minutes of a sermon, a guy talking to you. There's probably worship, sermon, worship, lead, right? Paul would come in here and be like, this isn't working. We need to make the sermon 10 minutes long. We need to have 20-minute like Dialogos conversations. And why do we do worship this way? Like, I don't think we understand how much Paul is, I think Paul, because that's what he's doing in the Third Testament. The question is like, what should be happening when you go to church? Right? You know, we're talking like this. You're talking about the mystery. You're talking about the beauty. You're talking about the openness to the other person, the openness to the mystery, the openness to the miraculous, but not the seeking of the miraculous. Because ultimately, if I would have sum up, I'd say that's the balance. You're open to the miraculous, but you don't need the miraculous. That's when it becomes pathological. Paul would walk in and look around and be like, this is not working. This is not good. And everything would be on the table. Maybe meeting Sunday morning is not the way. Maybe it needs to be Sunday evening at 5 p.m. Maybe it needs to be different days of the week. Maybe, well, honestly, I do think, and there's a guy who talks about this, I do think the modern sermon structure is very problematic. The church actually should be more Judaist. Like in Judaism, you have a continual dialogue and a continual conversation. That's what we see Jesus doing. Jesus gives like one sermon on the mount, but the majority of the time is very much locked in conversation with people, right? Conversation is where the congregation gets to actually talk with the preacher about what they're dealing with and where they're at versus being talked at, which is what? Boring. Very often is freaking boring. I think Paul would walk in and be like, why are y'all doing this? It is boring. This is not actually feeding people, right? And why aren't we talking about the real situations we're in? He would come and reform it. But we're not very creative in those things. I think Paul was far more creative. But anyway.
Yeah, now we're really dialing in on something. I can feel that. It reminds me, I went to a service a little while back. The main cathedral in Oaxaca was still continuing COVID protocol. So they were serving the bread, but they weren't serving the wine. And I started thinking about this metaphor of like bread without wine, like you're getting fed, but it doesn't have the living substance. And that's kind of how I would describe that church experience. It's bread without the wine. There's like the Dionysian, the lifeblood, the essentialness of it is not quite present. Just to return briefly to that magic and beauty thing, I think there's something about magic without depth of participation that basically becomes instrumentalized. It's very similar to me to the paradigm between genuine dialogos and coaching. Certain kinds of coaching paradigms, they can do a lot of magic and they can kind of like use a lot of charisma or force or energy or kind of super saturate you to make you have an experience, but it didn't have that sort of self-authentic depth of participation, which comes in relationship to beauty, comes in being conformed with beauty. So maybe there's a triad of kind of beauty, magic, and depth of participation where they kind of balance one another. And at a very practical level, as someone who's kind of experientially exploring Catholicism in Mexico, you have these things. You have the holy water, for example. There's something for me about the holy water that is reminiscent of the baptism. It's a reenactment of the sense of like immersion into the waters and re-emerging. And so when I take the water, that's what it's doing for me. But in Mexico, you also have the priest going around with this kind of shaker sometimes. He's just like hitting everybody with the water. And sometimes I do feel like, is that more of that kind of chasing the miraculous, chasing the blessing? People will often come with artifacts and objects at the end of a service to have the priest literally just splash that holy water on it. And it's not clear to me, was it actually about that profound participation in beauty that kind of transformed that object? Or is it just the material magic of the priest holds the magic authority and he has put the magic water on my thing and now is blessed? So too with the Eucharist, I would say. If there isn't the depth of seeing through it, being through it, and feeling the beauty of the whole thing, then the nature of the transformation will be more kind of magic and in a certain sense superficial.
Well, just as a quick note, not to interrupt you, I think what's very important is in the Bible, where there is the miraculous, there is immediately lurking danger. Like if you touch the Ark of the Covenant, you're dead. If you go in, but if you're not a high priest and you go behind that veil, you're dead. Like Jesus revives Lazarus and now they want to kill him. One does have to question, because I know there are many of those kind of activities that can happen in different churches. One of the issues becomes this idea of giving magical properties that then is going to solve your problem, as opposed to being incredibly dangerous. Like the history of working with the magical, something that has that, is that, wow, we are creating a space of great like power. and thus it is dangerous, like Beatrice's smile, right? So when you start talking about basically forms of lucky charms, or kind of like, okay, this is blessed and it has like luck properties to it, a reason why I would question that is because it does not fall very much in the tradition of what we see. And this is where going to the Bible actually can be important. Versus, and this is where I do think you have to have, like the Catholic Church will say, well, there's the tradition that has authority. Well, the Protestant would be like, well, what if the tradition gets away from the theological consistency that we see in the Bible? And like a theological consistency that we see in the Bible is that wherever the miraculous is present, there is great danger that is also present. It's like the category of luck, or anything that would border on increasing luck, does not seem to be something that the miraculous is in service of. The miraculous brings with it a kind of, well, with a kind of danger, but this is the funny thing. It seems as if what is necessary for creation to move toward new creation is a mixture of the beautiful and the judgmental and the dangerous and the inspiring and the grand. Like this mess of higher dimensionality that all comes rushing in at the same time. That seems to be what is required to compel us toward new creation, which of course makes sense, because if new creation is higher dimensionality, then we would expect the things of which push us toward new creation would not fit neatly in a box of being just good or just bad or just beautiful or just judgmental. They have to be a higher meta-geometry, as someone like a Leibniz might put it, right? And so I think we do have to question, because at this point, you know, I'm not trying to be critical, because you know, I can bring lots of criticism to Protestantist emphasis of the word at the expense of beauty, but we have to have a kind of canon, a kind of heuristic by which to determine if, oh, does this align with the kind of process of new creation we see with Jesus or not? And a good basic heuristic is it multi-geometrical or not? Is it a higher dimensionality or not? Does it fit neatly within a box of good or bad or not? Does it fit neatly into increasing luck or not, right? Because you would say, well, hold on, Dan, you know, you're blessing this object, but that doesn't guarantee it's going to do something good. So, you know, it's good and bad. No. Higher dimensionality is not good or neutral. It's good, and if used in the wrong way, bad. That's different. It's not good or nothing. It's good, but if you don't hold it or honor it or put it in the right ritualistic context, it can be very destructive. Like Beatrice's smile is good, but if it's too quick, it will destroy you. That's a different ball game. That's a matter of holding, and that's why in many forms of the Eucharist, especially before Vatican II, the Eucharist was really tied to a very specific and almost rigid ritual to kind of, and Cleo will talk about, like to make sure that the miraculous in this process is contained within this sacred space, precisely because it is so dangerous, but it also is so beautiful. We got to make sure there are clear parameters for where it occurs and that's honored, because you're dealing with some real power here, right? Now, whether one believes with it or not, the point is there's a conception of a higher dimensionality that is going on there, right? And then I'll give it back to you. Likewise, I think when we think of what participates in new creation and what's point towards new creation, we need to look for characteristics of higher dimensionality. Dialectical thinking, situational reasoning, meta-geometry, these things that are not good or bad, but good if in the right order, requires lifelong practice to hold in the right way. And that just goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of Dante at midlife journey. I think midlife journey is when you're brought to the place to be ready for the multidimensional, the higher dimensionality, and we have a society that doesn't have any infrastructure or training for that. So we have no way by which to realize the fullness of multidimensionality in this higher form. But let me give it back to you.
Right, that is a devastating point you just dropped. That we don't have that there is no organized space for that is in a way part of what this project is speaking to, or in parallel to, is like, if Christianity beyond itself is doing Christianity beyond itself well, it should certainly be creating a context for ongoing developmental evolution in which you can have notionally an idea of beauty or what it means to be a man or something like that can be accessed at lower dimensional levels, but is not confined to them, that is fractally nested, that is like you open into higher levels of this, And then there's also a kind of discernment about how to kind of transmit that up and down.
Exactly.
One could imagine that. I mean, it's difficult for us to think of kind of that Indiana Jones Ark of the Covenant, like that sense that there is some divine revelatory experience of extra dimensional sacred beauty that is so potent that it would just absolutely devastate us. But experientially, I can definitely attest to the reality of a titration, of a gradual conformity, which is me at 19 years old could not meet the feminine, could not meet the beauty of woman as I can at 28. Because there's a developmental process of becoming able to see, witness, hold, have within myself the qualities that allow me to actually conform to that. Otherwise, it almost, it's going to blow the fuse, or you're just not even going to be able to see it, right? So I like with Christianity, I would suggest that maybe there's a titration here in the beauty, both within the tradition, but more broadly within divinity, that I'm able to see. Because there's like time to digest that. There's time to think that, there's time to hold that, there's time to land that. It doesn't make sense to go and just keep smoking DMT and having the revelatory dissolutionary experience, because you need years to land that. If you have the beatific vision, you need years to land it. And if you keep getting blasted, you're not going to be able to hold down, the life structure, the job, the doing the dishes, that gives you the structure that you need to be able to transmit that into some sort of craft, some sort of expression form, something that kind of lands spirit into matter, and thereby kind of instantiates what Teilhard called the divine milieu into the space around us. But Teilhard also suggests that the Eucharist, he sees through this dangerous, contained sacred ritual of the Eucharist as something that is ultimately to be beyond the Eucharist. He speaks of a kind of Eucharist of humanity, that this is kind of a fractal representation of that which will occur or can occur, or certainly he's spiritually participating in the Eucharist of the earth, the Eucharist of humanity, the raising up of the bread of not just that bread, but all bread of all life to be sanctified. And so, it's both to be contained in a way, but it's also to be seen through. And I note, and this is part of why it's Christianity beyond itself and not just why Jacob has returned to Christianity and it's all great, is because these profound experiences of the sacred I'm having are almost always off to the side. They're not shared. None of them are shared. I've had occasional God experiences in the midst of services, but I've never ever had a sense of like a shared, attuned field where that sacred experience has been landed in the collective at the same time. It's always me having my own thing and everybody else, having their own thing as well, and a wide range of frequencies and vibes and understandings and different levels, because we don't have that space that you describe. And I love that kind of vision of reformation. I think that really points us in the right direction, is something that is much more spherical in nature. I agree there's a place for the speech, the lecture, the sermon, but that dialogical space, that participatory space, that embodied space all of those things feel more in the right direction.
Well, I think Paul would walk in church and be like, "Where's that shared field? It's not here. What are y'all doing?" Like there is a way in which I think if you take Paul as a third testament, that there is a continual spirit of reformation at the heart of the church. Like it is always reforming, because the only way to form right is to have this ever going deeper into yourself, where as you go deeper into yourself, you reform, because it speaks to what you were just saying about the containment. Another way to think about containment is defining. Like you contain, that means you define it clearly. And part of the thesis is the idea that the more clearly something is defined, the more you can actually see everything through it. And that's kind of a claim of the metaphysics of Christianity. The way you know the universal is by really, really focusing on a single person in a single moment of history who is a single way. And by really seeing clearly a particular person, you actually see everything in the particular, because everything has this kind of fractal structure. You know how we were saying with Flannery O'Connor, it's the idea that if you really look at a tree correctly, then like really look at it, it is fundamentally sacramental. So likewise, there's a kind of thesis that actually, if you really, it is in the particular that you find the universal. It just turns out to be the case that it's really, really hard to relate with the particular. Oh, and by the way, the particular is not something of a moment of space, but an entire unfolding. That's the other trick with this, is that when we say like, well, how can it be that focusing on the particular can somehow point toward the universal? Because the particular is a well-defined process through time, and everything is isomorphic to the process. The process has an isomorphic structure that you can see clearly if you look at one thing clearly, right? And you see a kind of midlife journey. You see a sort of necessity of subjective destitution. You see this kind of moving on something of the ethical to the mystical, to then being able to spread it to everyone. You see in particularity the way something unfolds. So the kind of idea of if you well define, like if you well contain a ritual with the Eucharist, thus you well define it, actually, paradoxically, that can unleash it precisely because it is well-defined, so you can clearly understand it to see everything participating in it, or to see it active in everything. That is a weird claim of Christianity, is that you know God by really seeing a single individual in history clearly, like Jesus, through which you see everything, as opposed to talking about humanity. You would say, well, whoa, won't we get a God if we talk about humanity? No, actually, you get a better understanding of humanity if you see really, really clearly the right individual at the right time doing the right things, right? So there's a way in which containment is defining. And when you define something, you can see it clearly. And then funny enough, if you see it clearly, you can see through it. Because when we talk about going beyond something, generally there seems to be two ways you go beyond something. Going beyond it, like here it is, and you go this way, or you go deeper into it and you go beyond it vertically, which means you're still in it, but actually you transform it because you give it more depth, right? Like when you go into something, don't you change it? Because now it has a deeper bottom. It's not the same thing when you go deeper, right? So you're going beyond it, yet it's deeper, right? So the idea of going beyond Christianity, funny enough, means that if you get more specific and particular about it and see it clearly, you can see through it and change what it is within itself. And so it actually becomes something new while staying in the same place. And so when when you contain it, you define it. Now, another characteristic of this, I think, will point to this multi-geometry that we're talking about. And yes, I agree, we don't have spaces of this. But if I were to ask people, is marriage good? Huh? That doesn't really get at it. It's hard and good and beautiful and the most important thing and the most difficult thing. Okay. What about friendship? Well, it's hard and good, and it's hard, but it's the most beautiful thing. What about art? It's hard, it's good. Like if you ask people what are the most important things in life, often they'll say stuff like relationships, or their call, their purpose, right? And if you ask them to describe it as good, do you like it? Oh, do you like it? The true artist is like, it doesn't compute. Like it doesn't capture it, right? Well, basically, when we're talking about the metageometrical or the multidimensional, and saying that basically that's what Christianity is suggesting the good is like, well, that is paralleled by the way people struggle to describe the most important things in life, right? Like they struggle to reduce it to simply pleasure or happiness, right? Well, basically, Christianity is saying, yeah, the miraculous is like that too. It's both good and can destroy you. Jesus is God in beauty and dies on a cross. Yeah. The most important things in life are multidimensional and don't fit into any simple description. And yet we have institutions that make us incapable of describing our lives beyond simple linear terms. And so we have language and ways of understanding that when we reflect on our life to understand it, it doesn't work, and we have mental illness and don't understand ourselves and confused. So of course, when you go to church, you don't have these experiences of a shared field, because we can't even share in ourselves in a way that contains ourselves. All we ever do is flatten ourselves, because we don't have an understanding that when we talk about the good, you're talking about something that is metageometrical and doesn't fit into a simple box. It requires a lifelong art of managing and realizing fully, right? Marriage, love. So another way to think of that, when people say God is love, you go, oh, that's great. Wait, is love always nice? Is love always easy? Like, is love always like a freaking vacation? Like, here's the problem. When people say God is love, you say, oh, right, love is like wonderful. Well, anyone who has been in a marriage or a relationship knows that love entails dying to self, sacrifice, hard choices, beauty. So to say God is love, the problem is we conflate love and nice. That means God is nice, and that means everything is nice. That is not love. Love is a certain dying to self that makes possible resurrection. And so into new life, right? So even the phrase like God is love, which seems to be saying that God is bliss, suggests that bliss is not simply a unmediated process that doesn't demand anything of you. Yes, God is the beatific vision, but the beatific vision brings what? Judgment. You said it at the beginning. It brings a certain difficulty to it, right? So the thing is, too, the reason why I bring up the examples of marriage, friendship, and art, all of those require what? A commitment. Just like the ritual, it is well defined. You contain yourself. Right? You say, I'm going to give myself over to writing. I'm going to give myself over to this marriage. I'm going to give myself over to these communities. So what are you doing? You are saying, out of all of the possibilities in the world, I'm going to contain myself to this. And I'm going to pour myself into that temporal process. I'm going to pour into it, right? And by containing it, you well define it. And by having something well defined, you can then see it and then see through it everything. That's the crazy Christian metaphysics, is that containment leads to well-defined, which leads you to see and then see through. And that seeing through, which is the possible because of a rugged particularity, is then a community of Holy Spirit that fills everything. Like everything gains a new quality universally because of that contained, well-defined particularity. You can only learn to see by looking and testing yourself against a particular thing that is there before you, that challenges you and that tempts you to look away. Well, if you can learn the art of seeing from the particularity, then in seeing, you can see through that everything in light of that changes its quality. And so I think when we think about containment, like again, but here's the problem. In this necessity of containment for defining and honoring of the particular for the sake of the universal, there's the temptation of power. There's the temptation of the neurotic saying, yes, we contain this ritual. We're the church. We have all the power, bow to us, right? There's a perversion that is possible in that, right? Well, that's what has happened, right? This necessary of kind of creating a particularity then allows people to own the particularity and to control everyone and to begin moralizing, right? So that, unfortunately, has occurred. Well, this is why Paul as the Third Testament is so important, and the ever-reformation spirit is so important, because if that occurs with that Third Testament notion, it comes in and says, hey, this is destroying Christ consciousness. This is destroying Holy Spirit. It has to go. But in turning Paul into simply commentary on the gospel, then Paul cannot have that ever-reformative spirit to make sure the communities of beauty and mystery are occurring. Therefore, it is hard to therefore, the church does not honor the particular for the sake of the universal. It owns a particular and then makes everyone bow to it, thus giving them power, right? So that has occurred, and this is why a reclaiming of Paul as a Third Testament is a really big deal, because without that, at the end of the day, you can't get a Christianity that moves it beyond itself by going deeper into itself, which changes the quality of the thing as a whole, as if it was always already of that changed quality. So those for me are the stakes, but then I would just say again, and then I'll give to you, we see in all the things that people associate with the most important things in life, like relationships, something that can only be understood many dimensions, metageometrical as an entire situation. It simply will not fit into a single description. Well, so it is with love. So it is with human beings. And if we do not have institutions and infrastructures and social practices that make us as human beings able to understand the multidimensional, if we're stuck in the linear and simple descriptions, there is a mismatch between the human being and what is needed for full humanity. And we should not be shocked then if there's a lot of humans that don't seem to be fully human. We have not created the space in which that beauty could be realized.
Mm. When I think about my experiences of churches in recent times, I don't feel the particularity of the people there is being brought out sufficiently. I feel it's a kind of container that gives bread without wine. I feel it's a container in which we show up and you go straight into the worship music, which is a sort of uni vibe, kind of imposed universal, you could say. And then there's going to be a sermon, and then there'll be some prayer, and then there'll be casual chit chat. I didn't actually get to know the profound, distinct universals or particularities of any of the people present because that context was never made. And so there just feels like this starved kind of lack of a real meeting of anyone. And therefore it's like we're trying to kind of get this connection with the Christ in this kind of like second person, third person object of the sermon, the text, and the worship, but there's no real realization of the Christ in one another, which could only occur through the absolute realization of the particularity and the meeting of that, which would include all the things that kind of single planed church environment doesn't account for. It would include the shadow, it would include sexuality, it would include the beyond Christian traditions and various things of that nature, the different paths, the different sources of wisdom and insight and beauty that are not accounted for there, which, okay, that kind of feels like a good prognosis of what's lacking right there. And I also want to just circle back to the beyond as being both above, kind of going beyond as in like above or outside of, and also going through. And when you articulated that, I had a very distinct sense of this is actually a very this is a erotic insight, and it speaks also to the very radical notion of Christianity as a tantric path. That there's some things about Christianity that can only be realized through deep intimacy between human beings. Should also actually address the problem of marriage today, perhaps as well. It's that sense of knowing by going through, by going into, in this case, literally going into a person or a person going into you, but that being given to is the place where actually new depths of a person can be realized, which is why the Bible talks about being known. And so that, yeah, not a very direct tie-in, but that feels like a piece of the puzzle that is evoked here, and you can't reach there. It's almost like without the container of being deeply given and present to a particular person, you cannot kind of go through and beyond that person to the universal particular, to the divine particular, in that you can't reach the divine feminine, you can't reach woman as such without really being with woman in particularity or man in particularity. Yeah, that's really important. And so a Christianity beyond itself has to be deeply particular. Also, like any given community has to be kind of expressive and wrestling with the given particularity of that context. And so it's going to be different in each place. It's not going to be like the Jehovah's Witness program, which kind of attempts to create a universal gateway to the kingdom of heaven and then spread it as far and wide as we possibly can and give something consistent. And if we're all reading from the same prayer sheet, then that's going to help bring about the kingdom. But again, did it actually get down into the depths? Did it go into that particular soil and find out what's going on there and necessarily be transformed by the encounter with it?
Well, no, I think that's beautifully put. I haven't written on this and I could not prove it. But I often think that if I'm just focusing on Christianity and really the spread of the evangelical, American evangelical that Hunter talks about, moral majority, all these kind of ideas, the Roman road kind of atonement, a lot of that almost seems to be a response to the trauma of the possibility of a nuclear apocalypse. I don't think it's by chance that this occurs during the Cold War, because if you think at any moment the Russians may nuke us all, well then surely the Bible is not talking about Jesus working new creation or tending gardens or different things, because that doesn't seem to be aligned with the possibility of us all being destroyed by nukes. Surely it must be a doctrine of salvation where we get out of this world, and really it can't be tied to an intimate knowing of a particular person, because that would be ineffective at any moment we all get nuked, right? So under that trauma and fear of the nuclear bomb, it kind of makes sense that you would move toward a Christianity that's more about getting the word out there as quickly as possible, marketing, saving as many people before the bomb hits, right? Well, as understandable as that theology is, if in light of the trauma of World War I, you could even go all the way back there, World War I, World War II, and the nuke. What that ends up doing is creating a notion of mission that is apocalyptic at its core. It's hard to imagine a Left Behind series or the popularity of the rapture notion coming into existence until the nuke. Yes, there were millennialist tribes far back in the 1870s. There were movements of that, but it never took as a massive theological position that radically transformed Christianity from having a communal interest to more of a, dare I say, sales pitch interest, making sure people, do you know Jesus? Know this? All right, next person, next person, next person, next person. At any moment, the nuke would go off. Well, we're in the age that Jesus does teach quite specifically to be not afraid. The one who fears is not made perfect in love, that we can't be operating by fear. And if indeed the kind of American Christianity we have seen is a product of a response to the trauma of the fear of the nuclear bomb, which again, I can't prove any of this, but I often think about this. I do think we forget how traumatizing the idea that, hey, get under your desk, a nuke's going to go off, like in the 60s or 70s, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I do think we lose sight of what that was like for people, or coming back from World War II or different things. It is reasonable under that historical moment to go in the direction of saying, well, surely we can't be cultivating the future. We don't have a future. We're all going to get nuked. Well, we're in the age where we have to overcome that trauma. We have to come to terms with that generational curse, if you will, and see that we have been moved away from a focus on the particular in the slow and steady work of tending a garden. And sure, maybe at any moment a nuke goes off, but that's the fear you have to face. If you do not face it, you're going to form pathological churches. You're going to form churches and communities that are in response to a trauma, and so it's natural for them to traumatize. Their very foundation is a trauma. Therefore, they will probably continue trauma, right? If you want to stop that generational curse, then you have to start looking at the particular and forming a community that's going to last, that is sustainable. Beauty is a result of a process, of a diligent work over a long period of time, where you need a theology that is going to be thinking the garden versus the bunker. And you do that by focusing on the particular community, the particular people, not getting the right message and the right ideas before the bomb goes off so that you're saved. No, you need the ideas for these people so that you can better approach that person, and you can form this community that is a response to this particular place in the creation where you have been set to tend to that garden of new creation that nowhere else on the earth can tend to. So I think a lot of this in Christianity beyond itself is going beyond this trauma, going into this trauma, coming to terms with this generational curse. And, there's obviously more generational curse, if you will, or trauma than just the nuclear bomb. But I do think that as a historical paradigm is something that we have to face. And, you know, you could say it's more difficult than ever, given all of the global tensions going on now, that it would be more difficult than ever. But I do think that, I do wonder if sometimes you can't overcome a historical trauma, but in light of the historical trauma. You know, we could have overcome it in the 90s. World seemed pretty good in the 90s, and yet we didn't. It's very interesting. It's as if you can only overcome fears when facing them. You can't overcome fears when you're away from them. And it's as if that historical moment has returned to give us an opportunity to move beyond the Christianity that was a source of trauma and traumatized itself, to sublate it into something new and more possible. And so I think there's an opportunity here in that. We just have to face our fears. And there's quite a lot of fear that comes with relating to a particular person in a particular place. But because there's the real and the messy, and Bonita Roy talks about the man on the side of the road, the Good Samaritan story with Ivan Illich as disgust. There's the disgust, there's the shock, there's the horror. Well, if we cannot face that, then we cannot face our fears, and the one who fears is not made perfect in love. So for me, I think that facing fears is also part of what it means to think about Christianity beyond itself.
Wonderfully put. And we didn't even get to touch on courage and facing fears more broadly here, but that's a huge piece I love to explore further. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you've just said, that sense of circumstances reappear in new form in order that we can resolve the prior wound, the prior condition. The work of Christ and the work of individual, collective, and ancestral healing are one and the same. And so insofar as something that purports to be engaged in the work of Christ neglects to engage whatsoever with the science, methodologies, practices, embodied experiences, things that take you past just your normal socialized self and deeper into your body, breath work, psychedelics, so on and so forth. If it's neglecting all those things, then it's not really, it's doing some version of the work of Christ, but is it sending light down into the dark? Is it actually making things anew, which is the very essence of the healing experience, is to be able to see anew. And so that again points to the reformation of the very structural notion of what the church experience is, or at the very least to develop in parallel something that addresses and holds space for all of these pieces that the current Christianity doesn't address.
Absolutely. Well, there's a way in which, you know, for Hegel to return, and I've always enjoyed speaking with you. I don't know where the time goes. It's always a treat, Jacob. Goodness. You know, in Hegel, a return is always a return is never a return. The RE is always in parentheses. You know, when you return to the place of your beginnings, you know it for the first time, as Eliot put it. There's a funny way in which a mechanism of reformation is one, there's no other way for formation. If you don't have a reformation with the RE in parentheses, then you cannot have any sort of development. So in a way, the only possible Christianity is one that goes beyond itself, because otherwise it is stone. It is dead. It is not here now. And so the question is simply, what does it mean to do the work of reformation with the RE in parentheses? And I do think a big part of that equation is courage and facing fears and commitment to a particularity, so that you really can see the face of someone and have that infinity come forth versus given to the temptation of a totality, as Levinas encourages of us. But that requires the diligent work and the infrastructure and spaces that are there for people in midlife's journey, so that they can move to that higher dimensionality and that multi-geometry. But we have to make those spaces, and I think a space like Synth Space is such. So thank you for the work of making it.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you, Jacob Kisher.